Hello, and thank you for watching this Hatfield Museum and History Society community program presentation titled This and That, an Eclectic Look at Hatfield History 2026. I presented the first This and That program back in 2010 after looking through the Society's photo collection and finding that there were many great old photos that wouldn't quite fit in with any particular program, but I thought would be interesting to show. So I put together some of those pictures into a program called This and That, an eclectic look at Hatfield history. And so like all of the other This and That programs, I'll be presenting some history about a number of unrelated topics. And like the other This and That programs, there will also be some photos that you have probably never seen before because they have never been used in any other program. I'm going to start off with a few pictures from what was once known as the village of Treewigtown, located around the intersection of the Bethlehem Pike and what is now Treewigtown Road. But first, a bit of history about the former village of Treewigtown. The village of Treewigtown owed its existence to the King's Highway, which was opened in 1714 through the corner of land that would become Hatfield Township. Hatfield Township wasn't yet officially formed at this time, but it looked like this, with no other roads. In fact, its only inhabitants at this time were the Lenni Lenape Indians. Soon after the King's Highway opened, though, hotels and taverns and other small businesses, like blacksmith shops and wheelwright shops, began to establish all along the route, which later became known as the Road to Bethlehem. In the olden time of wagon and horseback travel, these establishments were a welcome sight to travelers. The earliest village in Hatfield was the village of Line Lexington, then known as Housekeepers, located where the King's Highway crossed into Bucks County. Sometime later, the village of Treewigtown was formed, although it was known as Hatfield Square. It was as early as 1750 that a German blacksmith opened an inn and tavern at this site. It is uncertain what the hotel was called back in its beginnings, but historian David Auerbach, in his 1944 History of Hatfield, suggests that it may have been called the Black Horse Inn. A stagecoach line started operating in 1763, transporting folks from Philadelphia to Bethlehem on the King's Highway. This possibly provided for more patronage for the Black Horse Inn, but historian Auerbach wrote of this first innkeeper, "He did not make enough money at this calling, or else spent it too fast," as the sheriff seized the property, which changed hands a couple of times until it was purchased by Jacob Snare in 1795 and operated as the Snare Tavern. It continued to operate under that name for at least the next 37 years when in 1832 Jacob Treewig bought the hotel property. No record indicates under what name he operated the hotel, but it was possibly simply called the Treewig Hotel. Here's a nice piece of Hatfield history that is not in our collection, only this photo of it. A beautifully stitched sampler that is inscribed, Amanda Malvinia, a daughter of J. Jacob and Mary Treewig, was born March 17, 1816, and made this sampler in the 16th year of her age, in the year of our Lord, 1831. The verse, "The mild religion from above descends a sweet engaging form, the messenger of heavenly love, the bow of promise in the storm," was written by English poet James Montgomery. Treewig only operated his hotel for 15 years before selling it in 1847 to Thomas Sellers, and the hotel was known as Sellers Inn. After selling the hotel, Treewig apparently made his living as a farmer, which is how he is listed in the 1850 census. Around the same time that Treewig bought the hotel, that is 1832, he also purchased 56 acres not far from the hotel. 2 years before he sold the hotel, he built a house almost across the highway from the hotel, as shown on this 1848 map. You can also see the Sellers Inn as well on this map. Unfortunately, toward the end of his life, Jacob Treewig, the father of four daughters, became insane and died in an asylum in 1860 at around 65 years of age. Strangely and sadly, both Treewig's wife Mary, as well as one of his daughters, also lost their reasoning and became victims of insanity. Jacob Treewig's former home is gone now, replaced by a Bergey's Kia dealership, but before the house was torn down in 2019, Frank DeMaria and myself were given the opportunity to photo document the structure. Some may remember it as Peerless Fire Control business building that at one time had fire hydrants lined up all along the Bethlehem Pike property. Or you may remember it more recently as the Country Time Sheds building. This is what it looked like in 2019 when Frank and I went to see it before it was torn down. One of the nice features of the old building was the summer kitchen with its two bake ovens, one on the back wall and one on the wall to the left. A fireplace in the house had been modernized for gas logs, but what we believed to be the original lintel piece was still present. And if we take a closer look, we can see the date 1845 on it. We asked about obtaining the lintel log for the museum, but someone in the Berge family was interested in having it. We did, however, get another piece of the Treewig house for our museum, the chimney pot. The chimney pot, an extension of the chimney's flue, helped improve the draft of the chimney and reduce smoke inside. And this chimney pot is on display in the Hatfield History Museum History Garden. If you didn't know what a chimney pot was, now you do. So now as you travel about through some older communities, keep an eye out for them. There aren't that many around anymore, so they're kind of fun to find, or at least I think so. Back to the hotel, we saw that in 1848 it was the Sellers Inn. This is our next oldest map from 1857, only 9 years later. And not much has really changed as far as roads in Hatfield, except for one major change. The North Penn Railroad running diagonally through Hatfield, along with the Doylestown branch running through the southeastern section of the township. And by this year, 1857, the former Treewig Hotel was owned by Charles Hoot. And although it appears on this map as the Hoop Inn, I'm pretty sure that was a typo error, and it was likely called the Hoot Inn. This map is from 4 years later, 1861. The hotel was owned by John Slipher, who it seems may have harkened back to the early years of the hotel and called it the Black Horse Hotel. Jacob Treewig's house still bears his name despite him having died the previous year. 10 years later, 1871, although it's not really clear in this image, I think you can make out that the hotel at this time was named the Farmers and Drovers Hotel. The hotel, no doubt, was frequented by farmers traveling to market on the road to Bethlehem, as well as drovers as they coaxed their herds along the dirt roadway. Also, the land on which the hotel sat was often used for the overnight pasturing of herds of dairy and stock cattle as they were driven through the country on their way to their markets. Now, although this map still names this village as Hatfield Square, it was also in 1871 that the first use of the name Treewig Town for the village has been found. It seems that it took some time for the new village name to become accepted, as both Hatfield Square and Treewig Town both were used for this village for a good number of years. In 1877, the hotel had been sold several times, but still retained the name Farmers and Drovers Hotel. Also, I want to point out by this time the road had been turnpiked, and there was a toll house at this intersection. I'll be referring to this toll house a bit later, so I wanted to point it out to you on this map. In 1881, Charles F. Lambert, the proprietor of the hotel at that time, placed this advertisement: livestock sales and exchange stables, and cattle pens and stables, pasture and grazing for droves, large yard for public sales. This 1893 map doesn't give a name for the hotel, but simply reads Hotel. And still, this mapmaker continued to use Hatfield Square as the name of the village. So how was it that Jacob Treewig, who died in 1860, received the honor of having his name memorialized in both the naming of a village and a road 11 years after his death? Well, we haven't been able to find a conclusive answer to that question, and these types of unanswered questions haunt me. We know that Jacob Treewig's oldest daughter, Amanda, who married Jonathan Mattis, had moved back to Hatfield from Indiana to live in the Treewig homestead following the death of her farmer. Perhaps she had some influence on the name change. We may never know. This is a photo of the hotel from around 1912 and is the oldest photo that we have of it. 4 years earlier, in 1908, the hotel property was chosen as the site for a large agricultural fair for both Montgomery and Bucks counties. The location was selected because this area of the county was especially devoted to agriculture, horticulture, and stock raising. Also, it was conveniently located for residents of both counties and consisted of about 40 acres of nearly level farmland. It was also said that Treewig Town's elevation provided a nice view of the surrounding country for miles around, and that a number of neighboring towns, including North Wales, Lansdale, Hatfield, Souderton, Chalfont, and Doylestown, were all visible from the hotel's roof. I mentioned that this is the oldest photo that we have of the hotel, but it could be said that it is the only photo that we have that was taken of the hotel. The only other images that we have of the hotel are ones where the hotel is in the background, like this one from around 1915. This photo was taken from the Toll House property that I pointed out to earlier on the map. And here's another 1915 photo showing the intersection of Bethlehem Pike and Treewig Town Road. The house on the left is on the southeast corner and was the toll house for a number of years. Now, to change gears a little, Prohibition was enacted here in the United States in 1920. That made it illegal to manufacture, sell, or transport any type of alcoholic beverage. And in March of 1922, the Treewig Town Hotel was in the news for apparently breaking this law. State police seized a truck loaded with 30 barrels of whiskey at the hotel and arrested 5 men, including John Casper, the owner of the hotel at that time, and 2 women in connection with the liquor seizure. The barrels of whiskey, and presumably those arrested, were taken to the Montgomery County prison yard at Norristown. It must have been quite embarrassing for the state police when they opened the barrels and found them to be full of water. Apparently, filling the barrels with water was part of a scheme to fool the law, which apparently it did. Don't ask me how the whole scheme worked because I wasn't really able to understand it. But anyway, even though the barrels were filled with only water and no laws were broken, law enforcement officers were not required to return the barrels. Instead, a newspaper article reported that they became the property of the prison, with the warden stating that he would put them to good use at the prison in the making of sauerkraut for the prisoners. The only legal way to consume alcoholic beverages during Prohibition was if it was used for medical or religious use. So if you had a prescription, you could buy alcoholic beverages. This became a rather lucrative loophole in the system, which was widely exploited. Some less than scrupulous physicians were found to be writing several hundred prescriptions in a single day. These prescriptions were then filled at your neighborhood pharmacy. This prompted the rapid growth of registered pharmacists across the country as pharmacies basically became legal liquor stores. Here's a fun fact. The Walgreens pharmacy chain grew from around 20 stores to over 500 stores during the Prohibition era, largely due to alcohol sales. And here's a Prohibition era advertisement for a Walgreens drugstore. This ornate Prohibition prescription, dated January 25, 1925, was written for Hatfield resident Mrs. Henry Kratz by Hatfield physician Dr. Leidy L. Cope. The prescription is for spirits fermenti, the U.S. pharmaceutical term for whiskey, 1/2 pint with 1 tablespoon to be taken every 4 hours. The whiskey prescribed for was filled by pharmacist E. J. Freeman in Lansdale. We don't know what Mrs. Kratz's ailment was, but doctors prescribed alcohol for a wide variety of ailments, including the flu, cancer, indigestion, anxiety, depression, or even vague complaints like general weakness. There's no way of knowing how many home stills were in Hatfield during the Prohibition, but some time ago, Dorothy Kramer Wolf recalled that while living in what was often referred to as the Wright Conspiracy House as a child, she witnessed some suspicious behavior that led her to think that perhaps a moonshine still was on the property. This is a 1974 photo of the house, which is out on Colonial Drive in southern Hatfield Township. Dorothy had memories of a big old 2-story barn on the property, the one seen here in this 1920s photo, that she considered a rather spooky place. Part of the barn was always locked up, she said, and a man by the name of John Fisher would come in with his truck and go into the barn. She said that she never did see what went on in the barn or what was kept in the locked part, but believed that it had something to do with beer or alcohol since it was during the Prohibition around 1931. This is Will Baker, who apparently married into the Kramer family and lived at the house at this time. Back to the Treewigtown Hotel. After the Prohibition era ended, the hotel changed hands a number of times and operated under both the Treewigtown Hotel and the Treewig Inn names. A search on the internet showed that a 30-inch black and white television was considered a large screen set in 1951. These sets, like the ones seen here, were rare expensive sets costing around $1,800, which is over $20,000 in today's money. The last reference to the hotel that I found in our newspaper collection was from 1962, so it seems that perhaps the hotel was permanently closed around that time. The village name of Treewigtown finally made it on a map as seen in this Hatfield Township map from around 1951. This photo from a 1964 auto accident on Route 309 is the only other photo we currently have of the hotel, and again, it is not the subject of the photo but is seen in the background. It appears that the 220-year-old hotel, with its wonderful history, finally met its demise around 1970. The land sat vacant for a number of years until the Berge service station was constructed on it in the 1980s. Just north of where the hotel stood is this rather nondescript building. The building dates back to 1931 when Lawrence Maurer established Larry's Auto Supply there. This is another photo of the 1964 accident, which captured Larry's Auto Supply in the background, the only photo that we have of this longtime business. He operated the business until his death in 1951, after which it was run by his wife, Blanche Maurer. She continued the business until retiring in 1959. The building later served as an Amoco transmission repair shop and a number of other businesses over the years. And another view of the building when it was the Amoco transmission shop. I love old maps, and you've seen a number of them already in this program. I mentioned that the 1848 map is the oldest detailed map of Hatfield that we have, but there are a few more maps with not much detail that you might also find interesting. This map dates way back to 1687. Now, just for perspective, King Charles had granted this land to William Penn just 6 years earlier in 1681. It shows, from left to right, Chester County, Philadelphia County, which would later become Montgomery County, and Bucks County. Most of this land, as you can see, was still forest, and although you can see landowners' names all over the map, it is likely that practically all of them never even set foot on their land. They just wanted to own a piece of land in this new colony of Pennsylvania. And as a side note, it is incredible to me the accuracy of these old maps given the technology of the time. It wasn't perfect, but it was very close, which I find amazing. Now let's take a closer look of our area on the map. In trying to figure out where the land is that would become Hatfield, I found that in 1708, landowner Griffith Jones sold 309 acres of his land to Edward Morgan, on which the historic Morgan Log House still stands in Tummenson Township. So this would put the future Hatfield Township somewhere in this area. Jumping ahead 72 years, this section of a 1759 map focuses on Philadelphia and Bucks counties. Although there is not much detail on this map, I believe that its purpose was to show the location of Mennonite meeting houses at that time. And looking closer, we can see Hatfield Township, which was formed in 1743. You can see on the map that a section of Hatfield Township is designated as the Plain. As historian Edward Matthews put it, quote, Hatfield Township, as regards to its surface, is remarkable as being one of the most level of any in eastern Pennsylvania, end quote. He went on to say that in earlier times, extensive portions of the township were called the Plain by people accustomed to much more uneven surfaces of their own localities. And this is how the Plains Mennonite Meeting House at Welsh and Orvilla Roads received its name, because it was located in the plain. Going 11 years further, this is a section of a 1770 map of Pennsylvania, the important section. It appears to show higher elevations, waterways, and major roadways. And a closer look at Hatfield. This is the King's Highway, or the road to Bethlehem, but two smaller Hatfield roads, the Cowpath Road and 40-foot Road, are not shown here, even though they were certainly laid out by this time. And finally, a 1793 map of Hatfield. It's not very clear because it is a very greatly enlarged section of a much bigger map. And while for some reason Cowpath Road once again did not make this map, the Allentown Road at the bottom left corner and the 40-foot road running through the middle, as well as the road to Bethlehem, are all depicted by the dotted lines. The first half of the 19th century brought rapid growth for Hatfield Township, with many settlers and numerous new roads. Quite a difference in 50 years. All right, I'm not going to torture you any longer with my passion for maps. Instead, if you don't feel old already, maybe this picture will help. It was 50 years ago that our country celebrated its 200th anniversary, its bicentennial. This photo shows a bicentennial wagon train making its way south on Bethlehem Pike through Line Lexington. The wagon train featured 50 Conestoga wagons, one representing each state. The wagons departed from Washington State in June of 1975 and traveled east along historic trails, converging at Valley Forge on July 4th, 1976, for the main celebration. Now here we are in our country's 250th anniversary. If you are new to the area in the past 20 years or so, you may wonder about the naming of some of our local shopping centers. For example, Ralph's Corner at Welsh and 40-foot Roads. So who's Ralph, some may wonder. From 1940 to 1978, Ralph Hedrick successfully operated his grocery store business in several locations in Lansdale Borough. Then, in 1978, Mr. Hedrick made the bold decision to move his popular supermarket out of Lansdale and into rural Hatfield Township. Ground was broken in April of 1978 for the new Ralph's Corner Shopping Center, and the new supermarket opened in time for Thanksgiving of that year. That's Ralph Hedrick standing behind his wife in this photo from the November 1978 ribbon cutting ceremony for the new store. Ralph's Supermarket continued until the early 2000s when it was bought by Clemens Market. Although Ralph's Supermarket is now long gone, the shopping center still retains his name. And how about the Snyder Square Shopping Center on Cowpath Road? Who was Snyder? The answer is George S. Snyder, who in 1884 started a grain mill business on Chestnut Street in the village of South Hatfield. Hatfield Borough had not yet formed at this time. He soon purchased a larger competing mill business on Market Street, which grew over the years to include lumber, hay, coal, feed, and more. Although George S. Snyder died in 1911, his business continued under the name of George S. Snyder and under the leadership of Snyder's son-in-law, Howard E. Heckler. In 1939, a hardware store was added to the business. Hatfield's population grew rapidly during the 50s and 60s, and business was booming at the estate of George S. Snyder, or simply Snyder's, as most people called it. By the late 60s, the business had outgrown its borough location, and so in 1971 moved into a new building on Cowpath Road in Hatfield Township. 10 years later, a shopping center was opened next to Snyder's and named Snyder Square, with, if I remember it correctly, a shop and bag supermarket as its anchor. While the anchor store has changed names several times over the years, and the estate of George S. Snyder Home Center was closed in 2004, the shopping center has remained Snyder Square for 45 years now. If you don't get much reason to travel on Welsh Road on the southern edge of Hatfield Township, you may not have noticed the wonderful recent improvements made to the Oak Park community's entrance pillars and gates. It was back in 1912 that Harry Richardson began purchasing the land at the corner of Squirrel Lane and West Main Street in Hatfield Township for his Oak Park community. It was an ideal location, he thought, close to bustling downtown Lansdale and right along the route of the trolley line. Richardson's plans was to build a small community of only 36 lots with bungalow-style homes, quite different from the many late Victorian homes of nearby Lansdale. And it was to be a rather exclusive community with early deeds prohibiting foreigners and blacks from taking up residence in the community. And prohibited activities in the community included breweries, taverns, carpenter shops, slaughterhouses, glue, soap, or candle factories, and no pigs or livestock, etc., were permitted. One, and to give the community an air of prestige, around 1923, Richardson constructed an impressive gated entrance, like something one would find at the entrance to a mansion. The gates were anchored by three pillars, each topped with a very ornate iron light fixture. The central pillar had a plaque reading Oak Park, founded by Harry Richardson, 1912. The side pillars contained images created in mosaic Mercer tiles depicting Native American Indians, one making a fire and the other shooting a bow and arrow. Richardson apparently had an interest in American Indians, as he also had two statues of Indians inside the community as well. The gates themselves were quite impressive. They were salvaged from a property that Richardson had purchased in Montgomery Township, on which sat the remains of a failed construction project nicknamed the Pink Palace, for all of the pink marble that was being used in the construction. And as you can see, it was to be quite an impressive structure. So gates from the property were brought to Hatfield for Richardson's gated Oak Park community. The years took their toll on the entrance pillars and gates, and in 1991 the plaque on the center pillar was replaced with a simpler one reading Oak Park 1912, and the pillars were all restuccoed. By 2020, the newer center pillar plaque was again in need of work, and the mosaic tiles of the side pillars were falling out. The mosaic tiles were replaced, and another new plaque was made for the center pillar. The 1991 plaque was then donated to the Hatfield History Museum for preservation. By 2024, 100 years after the entrance was constructed, the entrance pillars and the gates themselves were again in need of some work, as you can see in this photo taken not too long before work began. The pillars were again restuccoed, the gates received a fresh coat of paint, and the brush growing around the entrance was trimmed back. By the time the restoration project was completed, the entrance was once again the crown jewel of the community. Not long after Harry Richardson started his exclusive Oak Park community, there was another seemingly exclusive community being planned for in another part of Hatfield Township, and it was called Hatfield Park. The plan, drafted in 1919, encompassed most of the land between East Vine Street on the left and East Orvilla Road on the right, from Cowpath Road at the bottom back to the other side of the east branch of the Neshaminy Creek. Mechanics Realty Company, Inc. of Philadelphia owned this large piece of land and planned to develop a housing community on it, with their development plans showing no less than 700 movie lots. All right, so now would be a good time to review what movie lots are for those who may not be familiar with the term. Movie lots apparently are quite unique to only a few townships in Montgomery and Bucks County. In fact, you would be hard-pressed to find any mention of them at all on the internet. I have read that in the early 1900s, some Philadelphia movie theater owners came up with a creative way to lure patrons into their establishments. They went out and bought large, cheap parcels of farmland in the Philly suburbs and then divided the land into incredibly small lots, which they would give away to lucky raffle winners among their patrons. Other theaters apparently would place prize certificates beneath random seats, and the lucky patrons were awarded a deed to a small plot of land in the suburbs. These tiny land parcels, some only 20 feet wide and 100 feet deep, were too small for anyone to build on unless you wanted to purchase some adjoining parcels. I think that another plausible explanation would be that developers made deals with movie theaters to give away some of these tiny lots in hopes that the winners would then buy adjacent lots on which to build their suburban dream home. In any case, it seems that for most people, once the thrill of being an instant landowner fizzled, the dreams of a home in the country faded. Many of the deeds, stuck in the back of desk drawers, were just forgotten about. Many people didn't pay the taxes on these parcels, which ended up being taken over by the county and then handed back to the municipalities. Locally, the Lansdale Jefferson Hospital on the edge of Hatfield Township was built on a former movie lots site, as you can see on this map from 1951. And ever since the North Penn School District was formed in 1966, it has been buying up movie lots in Hatfield Township, located between the Plains Mennonite Church on Orvilla Road and the Ralph's Corner Shopping Center. And they ended up with many of the lots shown here, for some reason known as Lansdale Square. After all, it is in Hatfield Township. Anyway, the school district recently sold all of its movie lots to a developer who plans to build 161 single-family homes on the land. Now, apparently many of these theaters that gave away these movie lots were owned by those of Jewish heritage, so the term Jews lots was sometimes used back then when talking about movie lots. So that is what movie lots are all about. In addition to over 700 movie lots, the plan of Hatfield Park contained a lot of streets, as you can see, and 4 of them actually exist today. Dane Avenue on the left, High Street on the right, and Lewis and Lakeside at the top off of East Vine Street. The developer was stretching things a bit, naming a street Lakeside, but I'm sure that it sounded appealing to prospective buyers. Taking a closer look at a small section of the plan, the line there through the creek denotes a dam that the developer built in the creek, creating a large swimming hole, a nice marketing amenity. They even built a bathing pavilion next to the creek for the convenience of bathers. Mechanics Realty Company was apparently owned by men of Jewish faith and marketed the lots primarily to those of the same faith. This led the local community to call this section of the creek used for bathing the Jews' swimming hole, as you can see on this photo taken around 1920. Here's another great photo of folks enjoying the swimming hole, and that is the bathing pavilion or bathhouse on the right, where people could change out of their wet clothing. And another picture of the swimming hole at Hatfield Park around 1920. For some unknown reason, the development never took off. In this aerial photo from 20 years later in 1938, if you look closely, you can still see the dirt roads running through the planned development. And right there is the swimming hole dam. 20 years ago or so, when I walked the length of the creek from the borough office to Orvilla Road, the dam could still be seen, although the top of it was then level with the creek bed. And I don't know if you'd be able to see it yet there today. For over 100 years, most of this land remained undeveloped, with trees eventually covering the whole property. Now, most of the former Hatfield Park land is the home of the new Hatfield Police Station. Here are some railroad-related photos that you likely have never seen before. This photo is from 1925 and was labeled simply, "Laying Rail at Hatfield." No indication of where in Hatfield this was, though. This photo is from 1928 and shows crossing watchman J. H. Landis, who was stationed at the Main Street, South Hatfield crossing, which would be at the main hotel. In order to improve safety, the railroad started employing crossing watchmen at both the Main Street and Union Street crossings in 1916. Also from 1928, this photo shows railroad watchman John Frey manning his post, likely at the Union Street crossing. This 1929 photo is simply labeled "Signalman at Hatfield." The railroad signalmen were responsible for maintaining the railroad signal systems that ran along the track, ensuring safe operation of the trains, as well as maintaining the street crossing warning devices. The men are seen sitting on a vehicle known as a rail speeder. These rail speeder inspection cars made for quick, efficient travel as they perform their inspections. Early rail speeders were human-powered, as some of you older folks may remember seeing in old movies, but by 1929 they were mostly gasoline-powered. This photo from around 1950 shows a northbound steam engine approaching the Main Street crossing while a crossing watchman stands guard in the middle of the road. The watchman box, the little shack to the right of the crossing watchman, is the one that was restored and is on display in the Hatfield History Museum History Garden, and it is one of only a handful of original restored watchman boxes in the whole country. Watchmen continued to man the crossings from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. until 1956, when automated crossing gates were installed. This is a rare photo showing the inside of the Hatfield train station from around 1975. In it, we see Hatfield train station agent Jim Brownback sitting in his office in the station. Jim started as station agent in 1968 and continued in that position until the station closed in March of 1976. Matchbooks were a very popular and an inexpensive way of advertising your business in the 1940s and 50s. And we have quite a collection of Hatfield matchbooks at the Hatfield Museum. But here is a rather new addition from Titus Skeets Schwager's barbershop. Skeets opened his barbershop in the late 1920s on East Broad Street in the basement of the Davis Restaurant Building. Around 1955, he moved his barbershop to 12 West Broad Street, where it operated until 1966, when he sold the business to Dale Moyer. Another new matchbox to our collection is this one from Tony's Golf Station at Cowpath and Orvilla Roads. The phone number tells us that this was from around 1960. I'm sure that many of you Hatfield long-timers recognize this couple, Mike and Lucia Butera. The couple, both immigrants from Italy, lived in Graterford for a time, with Mike working as a tool and die maker. In 1972, Mike and Lucia decided that the best way to successfully raise their two daughters, Mary and Carla, was to move to Hatfield and start their own tavern business, the Hatfield Tavern, on East Lincoln Avenue. Mike had sold wine in his native country of Italy, so the tavern business was not at all a new experience for him. This photo was taken soon after the Buteras bought the building in 1972. And another view of the Hotel Tavern from 1972. This is a 1975 interior photo of the tavern showing the original bar. In 1980, major renovations were made to the Hatfield Tavern, with the addition of 2 dining rooms with a total seating capacity of 94 guests. The name was also changed to Butera's Restaurant. The business now transitioned from serving only standard bar fare like sandwiches to introducing authentic homemade Italian dishes that had never been experienced before in this area, and everything was served with elegance on white linen covered tables. Butera's Restaurant continued until 2000, when after 28 years in the business, the Buteras decided to retire. Mike is a neighbor of ours, and Deb took this picture of him during a recent visit with him. The restaurant changed hands several times over the next 24 years and is now home to Poppy's Tavern, with the new owner changing the business model from the previous longtime sports bar back to a more family-friendly restaurant. Nothing terribly exciting about this photo. It's just one of the many old farmhouses that have disappeared from the Hatfield landscape over the years. This one was out on 40-foot road right across from where Applebee's is today. Like many old farmhouses, it sat back quite a distance from the road. Unlike the farmhouse, the barn was right up close to the road. That's 40-foot road to the right of the barn. Farmers built barns near the roads for easy access for market travel and supplies, while keeping homes further away to provide privacy, space from noisy and smelly animals, and it was a good idea to have some distance between the structures in the event of a fire. And here's an aerial photo from 1958 showing the farmhouse and barn location. The house was demolished in the mid-1990s, and the Lowe's store is now on that site. And absolutely nothing in the picture is still there except maybe the dirt. I love looking through our digitized collection of Hatfield newspapers when I get a chance, and always find something interesting or learn something new about Hatfield's history. This October 1922 newspaper article proclaims that the Davis Building is almost completed. The new building, next to the Hatfield Trolley Station, was built by Horace Davis, known to most as Inky. The building had a restaurant and billiards room on one side, the side closest to the trolley station, and a separate room for ladies on the other side, with its own entrance and completely separate from the restaurant and billiard room. Apparently, at that time, no respectable woman would ever be seen anywhere near a billiard room. The basement had 4 divided rooms to be leased out to small businesses. This is where Skeet Schwager, that I talked about earlier, started his barbershop business. The Hatfield Drugstore, which later became the Hatfield Pharmacy, also had its start in the Davis Building basement. One problem with having your business in the Davis Building basement, it would occasionally flood during very heavy rains, and you could end up with several feet of water, like you see here in this 1940s photo. And here are members of the Hatfield Fire Company pumping water out of the Davis Building basement after the same storm. The cost to construct the Davis Building back in 1922, about $10,000. For those of you who may not know, before moving to their current church building located on Cowpath Road, the congregation of Heidelberg Church held services here in this building on East Lincoln Avenue in Hatfield Borough. And this is what the inside of the church looked like in 1959. By the 1960s, the congregation was outgrowing their church building and went on to build a new church on Cowpath Road in 1967. The old church was sold and eventually became a residence. Here's what the interior looked like in 2013. Soon after this, the building once again became a place of worship as the Egyptian Coptic Church purchased it to hold services while their new building was being constructed on Unionville Pike. Once their church was completed, the old church building was sold again, and this is a recent photo of what it looks like inside. Pretty nice. This is an interesting undated photo of the Hatfield Speedway, new to our collection, that I found online. My guess would be that it is from the late 1940s. The photographer, Frank Smith, was in the top row of the stands right there. And the photo focuses on this area behind the grandstands, a view I had never seen before. The photo appears to show midget drivers preparing for a day of racing at the track. In the background to the right, you can see the old farmhouse on the Durstein property that stood there until it was demolished in the 1970s, I believe. In 1898, a Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper writer traveled from Philadelphia to Allentown on bicycle, mostly on the Bethlehem Pike, and made a written record of his trip. But before I get into his story, you might find some history on the Bethlehem Pike, the oldest road through Hatfield, somewhat interesting. Bethlehem Pike originated from a Native American Indian pathway known as the Mincy Trail, named after the Mincy Indians. The trail was a route between the northern Blue Mountains and the lands to the south. European settlers soon discovered and utilized the trail, improving it over the years to meet their needs. In 1714, it was officially opened as a road from Philadelphia north to Lexington. In December 1740, a Moravian bishop and his party traveled north along the trail and settled an area which became known as Bethlehem. After the founding of Bethlehem, a number of settlements began to establish along the route, causing a constant use of it, and the highway came to be called the King's Highway. A stagecoach made its first run between Philadelphia and Bethlehem on September 10, 1763, with regular trips made on a weekly basis. This contributed greatly to the growth of small villages along the route. Bethlehem Pike was at one time, as the name suggests, a turnpike or toll road. In 1813, the Springhouse, Northampton Town, and Bethlehem Turnpike Company was incorporated to improve the town to Bethlehem from the Springhouse Tavern to the borough of Northampton and on to the town of Bethlehem. The road was to be between 50 to 60 feet in width and laid out so as not to cause hardship to any buildings along the route. A minimum 21-foot width of this roadway was to be surfaced with pounded stone and gravel to form a firm surface. This was a rather ambitious project, and its progress was very slow, starting in Springhouse and inching its way north. In time, it became apparent that the company would never complete the project to Northampton and Bethlehem, and in fact, they never even got to Quakertown. By 1833, 20 years after the Turnpike Company was incorporated, the company finally completed improvements up to Treeweek's Tavern in Hatfield Township. The state, which oversaw the operation of the Turnpike Company, essentially told them to complete 2.5 more miles and they would be finished. So they did, and the Turnpike Company became the Springhouse and Hilltown Turnpike Company. Apparently, in the mid-1890s, the road was in pretty bad shape, and the Turnpike Company did some extensive improvements to the road in the late 1890s. Back to our intrepid Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper writer, it was in 1898 that he decided to embark on a bicycle journey from Philadelphia to Allentown, mostly on the Bethlehem Pike, and to make a written record of his trip. And perhaps he rode a bicycle like this one, advertised for sale in 1898 for $14.95. He reported that if one had not been on the turnpike for a couple of years, they would hardly recognize it now, as it was in such good condition, at least up to the Bucks County line. He also reported on a recent change to the toll payment system, which he apparently was not too happy about. With the old system, he could just stop and drop a few pennies into a receptacle at every toll point along the way and continue on. With the new system, he had to prepay his toll and receive a toll ticket voucher. However, now he had to stop at every other bend in the road, dismount his ride, produce his voucher, and wait to receive the regulation punch. Very inconvenient. Another newspaper writer from around the same time was also dissatisfied with the toll collection system and complained that the turnpike toll houses were so numerous that one could scarcely travel a mile without meeting up with one or more. He went on to say that he wouldn't mind the numerous toll houses so much, except that the Turnpike Company invariably placed in charge of their gates some aged couple who could scarcely scramble out to collect the toll money. And if you didn't have the exact amount to pay the toll, it could take almost as long to have change made as to drive to your destination. The Philadelphia Inquirer writer recorded details of his trip, including how when he arrived at Calmer, he noticed a scent of delicious milk from the dairies hereabouts. The scent noticed was possibly emanating from the Calmer Creamery. As he reached the village of Line Lexington, the writer reported that northward from this point, the road was anything but pleasant, a common stone road, but a good stone road. This is a sketch that accompanied his report on the village of Line Lexington. Here's a toll ticket voucher from the 1890s. It lists all the toll houses along the road where you would stop to pay your toll. And you could ride the entire Springhouse to Hilltown Turnpike on your bicycle for 10.5 cents or by horse for 15 cents. There were 33 toll houses along the Springhouse and Hilltown Turnpike, and 16 of them, almost half, were located in Hatfield or just across the road in Hilltown Township. And this map shows where they were located. Here's a March 1955 newspaper advertisement for a Hatfield business that I had not previously known about, Busy Bee Bakery. They were located in this building at 514 South Main Street, next to where Bean's Grocery Market once was, at the corner of Main and Vine Street. They featured freshly baked breakfast cakes, cinnamon buns, cookies, and layer cakes. The business apparently didn't last very long, which is why I suppose I never heard of them. The last mention of them in the Hatfield Times newspapers was in November of that same year, 1955. Around 1955, Elmer Hartnett and his wife Alverta purchased several movie lots on the corner of Cowpath and Orvilla Road. They then contracted with Warren Wimmer to build a restaurant there for them. Hartnett's Sandwich Shop opened in January of 1957, but they apparently only operated the business until July of that year, when they leased it to Jacob Jake Longacre. This is a 1958 newspaper advertisement for the Longacre Sandwich Shop. Jake was a heavy smoker, however, and died of esophageal cancer in March of 1959 at the young age of 36. His wife apparently kept the business going until 1961, when the Hartnetts again took over the shop. It seems that they operated the business until 1964, when they again leased it out and eventually sold it. Some of the other businesses that people on Facebook seem to remember operating there over the years were Jim's Drive-In in the early 1970s, Richie's, Mike's Sandwich Shop, Pierre's from around 1983 to 1986, and Vincent's Pizza, which was operated by his wife, Sophie. That business later moved to Hatfield Southern Pike and was called Sophie's. Then Vinnie's Pizzarama opened in the building around 2003, where they operated a very successful business until 2020, when they moved to West Broad Street in Hatfield Borough. The old sandwich shop building sat vacant until being demolished in 2023. But fear not, another pizza shop is coming soon to that same location. The name Peggy Fleming will be familiar to many of our more mature viewers as the gold medal winning figure skater of the 1968 Winter Olympics held in France. 6 months earlier, she visited our area to promote the U.S. Figure Skating Championships, which were held at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. For 2 hours, Peggy practiced her routines at the Melody Brook Ice Skating Rink in the Calmer section of Hatfield Township. The skating rink is now home to Produce Junction. Motorcycles were an inexpensive alternative to the automobile in the early 1900s, but a definite upgrade from the horse. This early 1909 photo shows Emily and Harold Bonekemper Sr. with their first child Emily, who was born in August of 1909. The driver of the motorcycle is Harold's father, Edward H. Bonekemper. This was apparently one of the first motorized vehicles here in the Hatfield area. And if I have my information recorded correctly, these are the grandparents and great-grandfather of Shirley Colt. Unfortunately, from the looks of that rear tire on the motorcycle, they may have done better with a horse. And now for those who haven't ever had the opportunity to see the inside of the Hatfield Borough Electric Substation building on Cherry Street, I'll give you a look. The building was constructed in 1908 when electricity first came to Hatfield Borough. Inside the small door on the right is a room where switchboards were to turn the town's streetlights on and off, and I imagine to turn power on and off to different sections of the borough. 2 years later, in 1910, the Hatfield Volunteer Fire Company was organized, and later that year they purchased their first fire engine. It was a hand-pulled chemical engine, the one seen here, and they needed a place to store it. So since the borough wasn't using the space, they let the fire company use the left side of the electric substation building to store their engine. This is what the inside of that part of the building looks like. Nothing real exciting about it. But the real gem of this building is the jail cell, or lockup, that is in the back right corner of the building. The cell is quite small, measuring only 6 feet by 7 feet, and furnished only with a narrow wooden bench for sitting and sleeping. 2 small barred windows provide some light and ventilation to the small cell. There's virtually no documentation about the use of this jail cell, but I think it could be assumed that it was mostly used for short-term incarceration of those who may have overindulged at one of the town's taverns. This small building with its single lockup cell is so unique that in 2016 it was listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Here's an undated photo of the Hatfield Boy Scout cabin out off of Coffle Road that is new to our collection. You may recall from previous programs that the cabin was built by repurposing wooden track ties from the trolley tracks that ran through Hatfield up until 1951, and you can easily see the wood tie construction in this photo. And what I think is just a great piece of Hatfield history hangs from the ceiling of the Scout cabin, a wood wheel light fixture. This light fixture was made from one of the wheels from the Hatfield Fire Company's first 1910 chemical engine. That's a special piece of history, and it's great that it has survived. And here's a more recent photo of the Scout cabin. And that's a wrap for our 2026 edition of This and That, an eclectic look at Hatfield history. I hope that you found it interesting and informative, and thanks so much for watching.